Fantasy romance is not romantasy. So how do you actually write this genre? Today we're exploring fantasy romance, a genre that's exploding in popularity and often incorporates fae, dragons, shadow daddies, or something in between. But fantasy romance requires a specific approach that's different from other genres, including its close cousin, romantasy. If you're new here, hello, my name is Brianna and I post writing videos every week. I also sell cheap digital and printer-friendly writing workbooks to help you world build, structure your plot, develop your characters, and more. So if you're interested, subscribe. All links are in the description below. What exactly is fantasy romance, and how does it differ from romantasy? We're seeing a huge rise in readers for these genres, and there's a bit of misconception going around about how to actually define them. In fantasy romance, the relationship is the primary plot. The fantasy elements create a magical backdrop and complications, but the central story is about the couple finding their way to each other and persevering together against the central conflict. Now, this is the opposite of romantasy, where the fantasy plot is primary and the romance is the subplot. In fantasy romance, if you remove the romance, you wouldn't have a story at all. Just a world. For example, the Throne of Glass series by Sarah J. Maas is romantasy because fantasy is central to the plot and conflict, and the romance is just a subplot. But books like Bridge Kingdom or Radiance center on the couple's journey, with magic underscoring the relationship conflicts rather than creating separate plot threads. Getting this balance right is important because fantasy romance readers come for the love story first. They want the guarantee of happily ever after or happy for now in a world that feels magical. I will note though that, like many things in literature, these definitions can change. They're fluid, and they're usually defined and redefined by the current social culture. So you or others might disagree with me on the definitions and examples I've given here, and that's okay. So what are readers actually looking for in a fantasy romance? They want a love story that drives everything else, a relationship that overcomes meaningful emotional barriers, characters with genuine chemistry and compatibility, fantasy elements that highlight the romance rather than distract from it, and a satisfying romantic resolution that feels earned. Now that said, there are some common mistakes that I've seen in fantasy romance novels that you might want to be aware of if you're starting to write a novel in this genre. Too much world building too soon. Unlike epic fantasy or romantasy, fantasy romance doesn't need elaborate world building upfront. You can get away with introducing the magical elements gradually as they become relevant to the relationship. Underdeveloped emotional stakes. When romance is a central concept, it's not enough to go on physical attraction alone. Readers need to understand why these specific characters need each other emotionally, maybe even spiritually, whether they know it themselves or not. Fantasy obstacles that don't test the relationship. Every magical or fantastical challenge should reveal something new about the characters or their connection. Insufficient romantic tension. This is a given because romance is a central concept, and if your relationship is a happily ever after throughout the entire story, then it's not going to be as attractive to a reader. So you can incorporate fantasy elements that advance this romantic tension, but not replace it. It should be the will they, won't they question that drives the story forward, and romantic resolution that ignores the fantasy elements. The magical aspects of your world should be integral to how the relationship resolves, not separate from it. So you're probably getting the picture now that you need to strike a very specific balance between both genres, where the romance is primary and the fantasy is secondary, but neither component should feel weak or neglected. So how do you create fantasy elements that highlight rather than overshadow the romance? This is where many writers struggle. The key is to design the fantasy elements to specifically challenge your couple's relationship. So here are some examples to help clarify what I mean. A magic system based on emotional vulnerability for a character who struggles to open up. A curse that directly impacts how the couple can physically interact. A magical bond that forces emotional honesty between two guarded characters. Or fantasy politics that place the lovers on opposing sides, like a fantasy Romeo and Juliet. This opens up plenty of opportunities for your characters to navigate these challenges in a way that pulls and pushes them together and apart, and this creates that tightrope tension that readers walk across. Now I'm gonna have to talk about this because this is a huge component in fantasy romance and romantasy in general, but let's talk spice. If you're not aware, spice is a term that many readers and writers are using to describe how sexually explicit their book is, and usually they rate this spice meter on a scale of 1 to 3 or 5 peppers. This basically defines how explicitly written these scenes are. So when you're writing a fantasy romance, how do you handle these different spice levels? This genre spans everything from sweet closed-door romance to exceptionally explicit scenes. The key isn't how much heat or spice you include, but making sure that it serves the emotional journey rather than just adding it for the sake of adding it. For fantasy romance specifically, intimate scenes should reflect the magical context of your world, reveal character vulnerabilities, advance the romantic plot, and sometimes incorporate magical elements in meaningful ways. Whether you're writing fade to black or explicit content, each moment should be a turning point in the emotional journey and not just physical gratification. There's nothing wrong with that, but it should also serve a purpose beyond that. So what story structure works best for fantasy romance? This genre typically follows a structure where the main characters meet early with immediate tension, whether it's romantic or antagonistic. The fantasy world creates specific obstacles to their relationship. Their emotional connection develops as they navigate these challenges together. A major fantasy element forces them to confront their deepest fears or vulnerabilities. Their love ultimately overcomes or transforms this obstacle. And then the resolution satisfies both the romantic and fantasy elements. How do you balance character development in a fantasy romance? Unlike some genres, this one needs two protagonists, both receiving equal love, care, and development. They both need distinct arcs that converge through the romance. You can do this by establishing individual wounds or needs that the relationship will ultimately heal, creating magical or otherwise challenges that test each character's specific weaknesses, developing complementary strengths that make them stronger together, and ensuring that both characters change meaningfully throughout the relationship. Okay, so now you know what you should be aiming for when writing a fantasy romance. But what if you're still not sure about how to start or how to even visualize or map out this process, plot the story, and the character arcs? I've designed 2 writing workbooks specifically for this. I'm not gonna go into a big spiel about this, so don't skip this, please, I need the watch hours. But if you would like some professional structure, this is how my workbooks can help. They're cheap, digital, and printer friendly, so you can use them to prepare and plan your novel whichever way works best. They're meant to provide you with structure and guidance without impeding on your creative freedom. My Ultimate Romantasy workbook can be used for fantasy romance as well, and it includes character intimacy profiles and relationship development timelines so that your character's emotional journeys stay front and center, a magic system framework to help you determine how each magical element directly impacts the central relationship, and my spicy scene workbook is designed to help you write intimate scenes, whether they're closed door or explicitly open door, in a way that advances the emotional relationship between characters, highlights their development arcs, and provides meaning to the overall plot rather than just being added to make the book spicy. I also have other writing workbooks like my protagonist and antagonist and story plotting and structuring ones, so feel free to check those out too. But if you would like that extra structure to help you get a boost in writing your fantasy romance novel, the Romantasy and Spicy Scene ones might be just what you need. I'm also in the process of developing a Spicy Scene prompt and descriptor bulk pack, which you can use with the Spicy Scene workbook or the Romantasy one, whichever one, so stay tuned for that. Also, each workbook comes with a beautiful vintage illustrated prompt card, so there's that too. All links are in the description. The magic of fantasy romance lies in creating a world where the romance feels both inevitable and hard-won, where the fantasy elements don't just create external obstacles, but illuminate why these two people complete each other. Now, if one of your protagonists is a chosen one or even manipulative, these videos will help you avoid some common pitfalls and make them your strongest characters yet. Drop a comment letting me know which part of this genre you find most challenging to write, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Until the next chapter.